Spud Webb.
Hi, I'm Spud Webb. Most of you know me from my work on the basketball court.
I've played pro basketball in other cities, but Dallas is my home.
How you doing? How you doing? All right?
I grew up here, graduated from Wilmer Hutchins High School. I know how good it feels to come home.
All right.
I'm proud of my connection to Dallas. I have roots here. Always have, always will.
And so does this place. It's the Museum of African American Life and Culture here at the Fair Park. It's a brand new home for the museum that really has been around for 20 years. Not that many people knew Dallas has a special African American art collection or even knew where to find it.
You can't say that anymore. This is the only museum of its kind in Texas and the Southwest. But getting this museum built took lots of hard work and strong faith.
This did not happen because some foundation endowed, a trust with $100 million to go build a building. This came about by watching a seed germinate into a sprout and a sprout grow into a sapling. And I think, again, because so many people are able to say, I remember when this thing was literally boxes in the basement of Bishop College.
In many ways, the Museum of African American Life and Culture did get its start at Bishop College. But some might argue that its first seeds were planted right here in Fair Park, way back in 1936.
And what a birthday party. A huge $25 million exposition in Dallas with all Texas playing host. 200 acres of magnificent buildings, a new city, a great city, a city of 1,000 sights and 1,000 wonders.
When Fair Park was built in Dallas for the Texas Centennial, it was like everything else in the Deep South those days, segregated. If you watch the old newsreels, you'll hardly find a black face anywhere. But in spite of that, it was at this celebration that the idea of a Dallas museum honoring African Americans was born. The huge event honored all sorts of cultures, from South America to China. It even imported dancing girls from Paris. But somewhere amongst it all, there was one building the newsreels failed to document: the Hall of Negro Life. Built with federal money over the objection of state and local officials, the Hall of Negro Life featured live performances by the likes of Duke Ellington and displayed art some thought too good to have been produced by Negroes. And as soon as the centennial was over, the Hall of Negro Life was demolished.
Another big day at the fair is Negro Achievement Day.
For nearly 2 decades afterwards, blacks could only use the fair's rides, restaurants, and restrooms on one day each year.
Is the Baby Doll Parade.
It is against this historical backdrop the Museum of African American Life and Culture now stands, covering the very spot where the Hall of Negro Life once stood.
There was a lot of turmoil and struggle that went along with building that building in 1936. There's been a lot of turmoil and struggle that has gone along with building this museum.
Dr. Glenise Robinson knows a lot about that struggle. Her husband, Harry Robinson, is the force behind the new facility. It's based on his concept that this museum can transform visitors of all races.
And when we talk about transformation, we talk about bringing people into the museum, providing certain kinds of experiences, and hopefully when they leave here, they will be different people.
Harry Robinson started working on this museum in 1974 when he moved to Dallas to run Bishop College's library. Shortly afterwards, volunteer Jane Jones became his secretary.
There was so little money always, it seemed, and Dr. Robinson and I were here by ourselves.
We took Jane Jones back to the place where it all started. What is today Paul Quinn College back then was Bishop, and it was floundering. Their little gallery was one of its bright spots.
The way he explained it to me is it was the culture and our history, and I wanted our kids, to be able to come to a place where they could see, what their ancestors had done and learn about their history and our culture. And I just thought it was a great idea.
The gallery quickly outgrew its small corner of the library and eventually filled up the entire basement. In those inadequate quarters, they never stopped dreaming and working towards something better.
Is it hard to dream from a basement?
No, I don't think so, because I knew that we would always get out of the basement and we would go someplace else. And at that time, we were, you know, supposed to go to the building that's out front, the chapel, the old chapel.
The chapel today is dilapidated. The architect's rendering shows the museum that could have been for $800,000. But stuck with the stigma of a collapsing college, Robinson couldn't raise the money. The museum remained in the basement even after Bishop College closed.
I guess you might say we were actually thrown off the campus. We were the last people here.
But by then, Robinson had a new location at Fair Park and plans for an even more ambitious museum. He also had a sizable donation from the Meadows Foundation and the support of retailer Stanley Marcus, who donated his African mask collection.
So I gave a number of pieces to the then nascent museum that was just in the minds of its current director as a gift to the black community and to this museum. I will be delighted to see some of my old friends as these pieces become exhibited in this new museum.
By the mid-'80s, the dream to build a new museum here at Fair Park had grown to the point that Dallas taxpayers bought a piece of it with a $1.2 million bond issue. The problem was that after you added in inflation and the cost of new programs and staff, the total cost for the new museum may well run 10 times that. So in the decade that Dallas spent $140 million building new museums and theaters downtown, Harry Robinson had to struggle to raise the money to keep construction here going. But along the way, he built a strong network of community support.
We have organizations now that will call us and tell us, we're putting you in our budget. We had one black women's organization that called, had a $3,000 check for us, unsolicited. And you can count them. Churches. We have one church that's given $25,000 toward the building fund.
Seeing churches as his community's backbone, Robinson turned to them for backing, raising money on the power of his dream and the strength of his conviction. Reverend Derek Harkins of New Hope Baptist calls Robinson's efforts inspirational.
Really, he's been able to draw the thread of commonality by letting people know that this is your museum. This is something that's going to benefit the story of your institution, and this is something that's going to benefit the entire, not only the African-American community, but the entire community of Dallas, because it points to the nature of Dallas being much more than just one particular ethnic group, much more than just one particular mindset.
Even though it's brand new, the African American Museum of Life and Culture is the product of a long history of struggle. Like the people it represents, it survives and prospers against all odds.
We have a rich history. We need to preserve it. We need to collect it. We need to display it. We need to talk about it. We need to know about it. And you have to work hard, and working hard means struggling. So you have to be able to do that in order to instill it in somebody else, because if you don't feel it, they can't get it from you. And I think that's all part of the struggle.
When we come back, I'll show you some of the things that make this building unusual and special. Pretty soon there'll be a cafe down here and a gift shop up under me. With the construction going on around here, things are really shaping up, and shape is very important.
From a grass field in Fair Park has risen a structure that, like the people whose culture it will house, defies easy description. A little from East Africa, from West Africa, some influence from the New World. All gleaned from years of research by the one architect who stayed with the museum's visionaries even through the most difficult of times, Art Rogers.
Well, what I chose to do was to select some forms that I found in some African structures or artifacts that I came across in the research, and I came up with a symbol from the Dogon tribe. But it was this shape, which is a semicircle with a notch and a stem underneath it, and then some notches below it, that ended up as a design element in the building.
But how the building looks is only part of what sets it apart. Other museums are made of expensive stone, exotic woods. The materials here are simple, and from the same Texas soil from which African Americans eked out a life.
The dome is made out of southern yellow pine from East Texas. It's the strongest wood, one of the strongest woods we have. It's also one of the least expensive. And there's nothing in my reflection on the African American experience that has this kind of pretentiousness to it. That hard stones, marble and limestone, some of the more traditional museum type materials. We have red oak as the ceiling in the gallery vaults, and I designed a special tile out of terracotta clay. They were made in Cisco, Texas, and I now use that shape, the Dogon shape, for that.
No four walls and a roof here. From above, you can see the cross shape, a Christian symbol to us, but not everywhere.
Some African cultures, it's a non-Christian symbol, but it is an African symbol. And I like that joint interpretation of it being, certainly the Christian churches are very much a part of the African American experience here, and to have both, the symbol work for both cultures, I think it's kind of a nice bridge. But it's important to me that people understand that the building stands for something, hopefully inspiring and illuminating. This is just the beginning.
This is a portrait of an African American, which is, you know, quite rare in those days.
100 years ago, African American artists were apprentices without control over what they painted or how it was displayed. Segregated galleries barred them from viewing their own work. But curator Edlika Thompson says at the Museum of African American Life and Culture, their skill will shine through.
Around the mid 1800s, 1850s, 60s, during that the style, the Romantic period, painters primarily used, oil on canvas. You could get a sense of depth, especially in the rendering of the landscape, the rendering of the figures.
34.
34, alligator, no problem.
Still, it will be folk art, African American folk art, that will attract the most attention to the museum. The largest collection in the Southwest, a collection that will finally give full voice to the whispers from the past.
This is a long bib duck. Paint irregular in front and side of base.
Edlika and folk art curator Debbie Gilman predict the complex works of Mississippi woodcarver Elisha Pierce will draw lots of attention.
A lot of his figures portray different religious activities or scenes from the Bible. He also did a lot of freestanding figures of animals.
You don't find a lot of folk wood carvers, untrained wood carvers who are this talented and that can conceptualize a human figure the way he does. Untrained artists, they mostly draw and pick up, pen and paper to craft things, and he instead picked up, a hammer and a chisel or a knife and started carving.
Dozens of Pierce's works will grace the walls and pedestals. Among the most prized, a huge piece from the Columbus Museum of Art.
One of the most well-known pieces of Elijah Pierce. It's entitled The Crucifixion. This piece was produced around the mid-1930s.
It is composed of several carvings that together provide an intricate look at Elijah Pierce's vision of Bible history. The tiny, detailed work reveals a patient man. But workers must be careful with each piece. Few art objects are more fragile than folk art.
They use a lot of untraditional materials and bad paint and whatever they can find, and so it's harder to put exhibits together of folk art because there is always extensive damage or just decay by the nature of the piece.
This is a card game here.
For Dr. Harry Robinson, the delicate nature of folk art only re-emphasizes the importance of this museum's work. If this institution does not work to preserve it for the public, it will all be lost, the artwork, the artists, all they lived through and believed.
Elijah was a lay preacher, and a lot of his carvings had to do with religion. That's one of the things that's very characteristic of folk artists, because many of them will tell you that they get their inspiration and their vision divinely, that God speaks to them and tells them what to paint.
Folk artists like Pierce and Clementine Hunter never knew each other, but they knew themselves and their relatives, and through their work chronicled the themes sacred to a people.
And that's the baptizing. And you see, here's another religious theme. And now the scene is down in Louisiana on Cannes River, dealing with her environment again. They always dealt with areas with which they were familiar.
So when the museum opens this Saturday, the art will join with the museum's other exhibits, such as the museum's collection of every issue printed of Sepia magazine, to do what museums do best: teach. Teach history and sociology and culture. Teach all of us about us and a proud past.
This is where I grew up. My father still lives here. These are the Deckards. These are the Shepherds. Just a few miles away is the old Bishop College, where the African American Museum started. It has a library that we can go in and study.
To be honest, when I was a kid, we talked more about basketball than about museums. But it's hard to know where you've gone if you don't know where you've been. And I want other young people, especially students, to know the museum has a new home for all of us to enjoy.
What's the big deal on the museum?
Well, the big deal on this museum is African American. And it's not just about, you know, where we hear about athletes all the time. You hear about different authors to art collectors to library and archive that you can go way back and do studies.
You couldn't find those kind of works in like a regular museum?
No, because you know, most museums doesn't have everything you can learn about the black heritage or the African American heritage.
It's really important they know the new Museum of African American Life and Culture isn't just a place to look at artwork on the wall.
A bright autumn day, the museum's shining dome like a precious jewel, a beacon of sorts for the community and for school children just down the street.
How about the population of lifestyle?
Their lifestyle, okay. That's one, so you'll go to another fact. Students at Daniel Chappie James Learning Center already study world cultures, and now their prominent new neighbor will help expand those horizons to explore the world of African Americans.
In Africa, they use masks for funerals and for many different occasions.
For this school and Don Lawrence's art classes, the African American Museum of Life and Culture carries a special meaning. From paper and paste, students gently shape tribal masks, some of the colorful creations to hang in the new museum, cementing the start of an important relationship.
This will be a very good teaching facility for us to use over there. And the children will be able to maybe relate a little closer to their own heritage of the accomplishments of the ones that have preceded them.
Like this school, the museum will educate with lectures and workshops for children, after-school programs in art and academics, exposing them to the unique experiences of African Americans.
I hope it'll be a place where we will be re-educating ourselves, all of the people.
Longtime supporter and school board member Yvonne Ewell believes the museum fills a vast void and provides a sense of self.
We built the country with our own hands, blood, sweat, and tears. We gave our lives. We died in every war, and yet we have not always received benefits commensurate with that kind of gift. So we need to know what we've done. We need to know it in art, in music, in literature, in history.
In the museum's name, a promise to celebrate life. Energy and excitement the Dallas Black Dance Theater and other performing artists will offer in the museum's 100-seat theater. Insight into a heritage rich with dance and song.
This is a place built by the community and for the community. Donations came in dimes and dollars. And now the museum opens with plans to inform and inspire people of all races, to touch everyone who comes through its doors.
It will be an alternative to some other things that kids are doing.
Dr. Harry Robinson has set high goals and holds a firm belief that changing attitudes can change lives.
Some people, we hope that African Americans will feel better about themselves once they see what their ancestors did in spite of all of the odds. And then with the other communities, we would like for them to see what the African Americans have done in spite of the odds. And we think they would develop a different kind of respect for the African American.
I think if anything, it'll bring people together.
To volunteer curator and history professor Dr. Marvin Delaney, the museum can unify people who've long been divided.
It'll make white Americans feel like they are part of African American culture here, in that they can go and learn and understand what African Americans have been through here in this country. We're finally getting to the point in this country where people recognize that Africans in America do have a special culture, do have a unique subculture here, and that they have made a significant contribution to how American society is today.
For the children, the museum is especially important. A few blocks away at the South Dallas Cultural Center, youngsters move in rhythm with African life. A hands-on experience here that connects them to a proud and powerful past.
It helps me better to understand about the history of African people.
In Center Director Mitty Jordan's mind, the museum is a gift.
For them to be able to walk across as a class and look at it more closely, and then it begins to make sense to them.
And it's a challenge.
I certainly see the museum as an avenue for enhancing the experience here, and I would hope that that would work the other way around, and I believe it will.
Marion Wright Edelman of the Children's Defense Fund wrote, "Remember your roots, your history, and pass them on to the children." And so through this museum, the journey continues to discover and celebrate African American life and culture, the hardships and the joys. It is a proud time for Dallas, for Texas, for all of us.
I'm proud for the community because what you see is the result of a community effort and community patience.
Now, on this special spot, the Museum of African American Life and Culture has at last come home.
I'm really proud of this place. Folks here call it a celebration center, a place that brings home a message about the accomplishments, the achievements, and the struggle of African Americans. But this really is a place for everybody, because the more we know about the past, the better chance we have to live together in the future. I'm Spud Webb. Good night.